Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about applying the lessons of my recent book with James Robinson, Why Nations Fail, to the European crisis. And I think the message of the book, simplified a little bit, is quite basic. You have to get your politics right in order to be able to prosper economically. In particular, if you look at the history of societies, it's been those that have built what we call politically and economically inclusive societies based on encouraging business, but also creating a level playing field, that have been able to grow and prosper. And this is a deeply political process, because one of the big challenges to building an inclusive society and achieving prosperity is that there are a lot of distributional conflicts in society. There are always groups ranging from absolutist monarchs to dictators to oligarchs who will be opposed to building such an inclusive society. And I think overcoming these sorts of political barriers and political challenges is one of the basic lessons that one has to take from history. Now, bringing these lessons to Europe, I think there is one way of thinking about the problem is that the glass is half full and half empty. The half full part, I think, is actually very important to emphasize, because Europe overall has been a very successful growth experience. And this is not only because the 19th century has been essentially the time where European economies pulled ahead of the rest of the world due to industrialization, but also because after the end of World War II, despite the very pessimistic outlook of many people about what was going to happen in Europe with more wars and more conflicts and the dire economic situation in Europe, European economies mostly were able to have exemplary growth rates over the last 60 years. And they have achieved this, not surprisingly, based on building democratic political institutions that created stability and created the level playing field necessary for economic growth, and also by creating economic institutions that encouraged businesses to innovate and invest. And I think this success story is also partly due to the European Union. You cannot have had this sort of stability and inclusive society in Europe just at the country level. It was also important to have supranational institutions that supported this sort of trajectory. And I think European Union was one of the bulwarks of that process. But the glass is also half empty, because Europe is in the midst of the crisis, and European Union is in the middle of this crisis also. And I think this is partly because no process of political centralization and changing institutions is a simple one, and mistakes are made, and certain challenges were underestimated as Europe was moving ahead. But I think at the end of the day, this shouldn't detract us from the bigger picture, which is that Europe's future can be quite bright still, as long as the same process continues, which is that Europe has to become even more democratic, and this is no longer sufficient to become democratic at the local level. It needs to become democratic at the European level. It needs to continue the process of integration, which means not just simple economic integration, but much more fundamental fiscal and political integration. And it has to continue the process of encouraging economic growth and economic activity, and that means a lot of the structural problems facing European countries all over Europe, not just in Southern Europe, have to be tackled. These are not easy problems, and I think politicians are often not the best people to have the vision to tackle these problems. So I think more pressure from the bottom up has to come for this process to continue. And I think one of the issues that we are facing right now is because we are in the middle of the European crisis, and many parts of Europe are facing great difficulties and hardship. Nobody is in the mood for even more reform, and nobody is in the mood of looking ahead for the bigger institutional changes and the underpinnings of future growth. But I think the debate has to come there, and the role of intellectuals and academics involved in this process, I think, is to bring the bigger picture questions on the table so that they are not forgotten in our rush to solve daily problems day in and day out.